Hi, I'm Mr. Hutchings, and this is Mr. Hutchings History. When you picture medieval Europe, maybe you think of knights in shining armor, castles, or soaring Gothic cathedrals. But the reality between 1200 and 1450 was far more complicated. Europe was a patchwork of kingdoms and feudal estates, racked by warfare and disease, yet also beginning a cultural revival that would set the stage for the Renaissance and eventually global exploration. This was an age of fragmentation and centralization, faith and conflict, poverty and prosperity. Today, we're diving into developments in Europe from 1200 to 1450, a time when Europe began its slow transformation from the so called Dark Ages into a rising force in the global tapestry. To understand Europe in 1200, we need to look back. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476, Western Europe fragmented into small kingdoms. Unlike China or the Islamic world, Europe lacked a strong central authority for centuries. Instead, it operated under feudalism and manorialism, systems that tied people together through obligations of loyalty and land. Meanwhile, the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire survived in Constantinople until 1453. But in Western Europe, life looked very different. Castles, small villages, local lords, and the all powerful Catholic Church. Between 1200 and 1450, this fragmented world began to change. Stronger monarchies emerged in France, England, and Spain. The Catholic Church reached the height of its power, but also faced challenges. Contact with the Islamic world through the Crusades reconnected Europe with global trade and knowledge. And by the 14th century, the Black Death devastated populations, but also accelerated long term change. Europe's political and social structures in 1200 were built on feudalism. Feudalism was a decentralized system in which land was exchanged for loyalty and service. A monarch granted land, called a fief, to nobles who became his vassals. Nobles gave lands to knights, who pledged military service. At the bottom, peasants or serfs farmed the land in return for protection. This created a rigid hierarchy: king at the top, nobles below, knights beneath nobles, serfs bound to the land at the bottom. Economically, Europe operated under the manorial system. Each manor was largely self sufficient, producing food, clothing, and goods for local use. Serfs paid taxes and rent through crops and labor, while lords provided protection. By the 1200s, innovations like the three field system, the heavy plow, and windmills improved agriculture, boosting population. But life remained local and rural with limited social mobility. Despite feudal decentralization, monarchies began consolidating power. In France, kings like Philip II and Philip IV expanded royal bureaucracy. Under Philip IV, the Estates General, an assembly of clergy, nobility, and commoners, was established, though it had little real power compared to Parliament in England. In the Holy Roman Empire, founded with Otto I's coronation in 962, it remained a loose confederation of states. The investiture controversy over who could appoint bishops highlighted struggles between church and state. In England, after the Norman conquest of 1066, William the Conqueror centralized administration. In 1215, King John was forced to sign the Magna Carta, guaranteeing rights like trial by jury and consultation on taxation. This was a landmark in limiting royal authority. By 1265, England had a two house parliament: the House of Lords, for nobles and clergy, and the House of Commons, for wealthy commoners. The Hundred Years' War began in 1337 and lasted until 1453. I know, that's more than 100 years, but yet the Hundred Years' War is what it's called. It was between England and France, and they were fighting for control of French lands. The war introduced new technologies like the longbow and gunpowder weapons. By war's end, France emerged stronger, while England's monarchy lost most of its French holdings. These developments marked Europe's slow transition from fragmented feudalism to stronger monarchies. No institution was more powerful in medieval Europe than the Roman Catholic Church. The Church provided spiritual guidance, education, and charity. It was the one unifying authority in a divided continent. The papacy wielded enormous political power, often clashing with monarchs. Monasticism preserved knowledge. Monks copied manuscripts, taught literacy, and ran hospitals. Monasteries also became economic centers. Yet the church faced challenges. The Great Schism of 1054 had already split Christianity into the Roman Catholic Church in the West and the Eastern Orthodox Church in the Byzantine Empire. Corruption and abuses, such as simony, the selling of church offices, and indulgences, sparked calls for reform. These tensions would eventually erupt in the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, but the seeds were already sown. The church also drove the Crusades. Beginning in 1095, Pope Urban II called for Christians to reclaim the Holy Land. The Crusades were often portrayed simply as wars between Christians and Muslims, but their origins are more complex. One of the key triggers was the struggle for access to sacred sites. For centuries, under the Umayyads and Fatimid caliphs, Christian pilgrims were generally allowed to visit Jerusalem and perform the Way of the Cross, the pilgrimage tracing Jesus' final journey. Early Muslim rulers, though Muslim, often tolerated these visits. By the 11th century, control of Jerusalem shifted to the Seljuk Turks. While they didn't outlaw pilgrimage, they allowed local authorities to extort heavy tolls from pilgrims and sometimes turned a blind eye to attacks, robberies, or kidnappings along these pilgrimage routes. One pilgrim, Peter the Hermit, recounted being mistreated. Pilgrims were robbed, the sacred sites defiled, and tolls became excessive. These dangerous conditions outraged Christians in Europe. Pope Urban II's call for the First Crusade in 1095 was, in part, a reaction to these disruptions, portrayed not simply as a war on Islam, but as a mission to restore safe Christian access to holy places. Of course, the Crusaders themselves were a mixed lot. Many poorly educated, driven by a mix of faith, ambition, and greed. Once they reached the Holy Land, hostility often overshadowed piety. Coastal communities that had previously lived alongside Muslim neighbors were caught in the violence. The Crusades, thus, became not just a fight over sacred access, but tragically, a period marked by conflict, conquest, and misunderstandings. The First Crusade captured Jerusalem briefly in 1099. Later crusades failed, including the Fourth Crusade from 1202 to 1204, in which crusaders sacked Constantinople, a Christian ally, instead of reaching the Holy Land. Despite military failure, the Crusades increased cultural and commercial exchange. Europeans encountered spices, textiles, and knowledge from the Islamic world, stimulating trade and intellectual curiosity. From 1200 to 1450, Europe experienced economic revival. Towns and cities grew, especially in Italy and the Low Countries. A new class, the bourgeoisie, or middle class, emerged, made up of merchants, artisans, and bankers. Trade expanded, fueled by contact with the Islamic world and Asia. Italian cities like Venice and Genoa dominated Mediterranean trade. German merchants in the Hanseatic League controlled commerce in Northern Europe. Figures like Marco Polo, who traveled to China and wrote about its wonders, inspired European curiosity about the wider world. Agricultural surpluses supported this urban growth, but challenges remained. Beginning in the 1300s, the Little Ice Age cooled Europe's climate. Shorter growing seasons caused famine, poverty, and unrest. Then came the Black Death from 1347 to 1351. Carried by fleas on rats, the plague killed perhaps one-third of Europe's population. While devastating, it also disrupted feudal structures. Labor shortages gave surviving peasants more bargaining power, contributing to the decline of serfdom. Medieval Europe was not homogeneous. Jewish communities often served as moneylenders and traders, roles denied to Christians by religious law. They contributed to Europe's economy but faced widespread persecution. Pogroms and expulsions occurred in England in 1290, France in 1306, and Spain in 1492. There were Muslims in Iberia. Spain had been partly under Muslim rule since 711. By 1200, Christian kingdoms of Castile, Aragon, and Portugal pushed south in the Reconquista, retaking territory. In 1492, the last Muslim stronghold, Granada, fell. Despite persecution, Muslim and Jewish scholars influenced European learning, particularly in Spain, where Arabic translations of Greek works reached Christian universities. Women's status in Europe was mixed. In rural areas, women worked alongside men in farming and craft production. In towns, some women joined guilds or ran businesses, especially widows. Noblewomen managed estates in their husband's absence, arranged marriages, and sometimes acted as political advisors. Yet, overall, women's rights declined as economies became more urban and patriarchal norms deepened. One exception was the convent system. Religious orders offered women education, leadership, and authority unavailable elsewhere. Figures like Hildegard of Bingen, a German abbess, became respected, had scholars, composers, and was respected as a visionary. By the 1300s, a cultural revival was taking shape, the Renaissance. In Italy, wealthy city-states like Florence, fueled by banking and trade, sponsored art and scholarship. Thinkers turned back to classical Greece and Rome for inspiration. The movement, known as Humanism, emphasized individual potential, civic virtue, and secular themes alongside religious themes. The printing press, perfected by Johannes Gutenberg in the mid-1400s, spread ideas more rapidly than ever before, increasing literacy and access to knowledge. Writers like Dante Alighieri in Italy and Geoffrey Chaucer in England reflected both religious devotion and critiques of society. The Renaissance did not erase medieval traditions, but built upon them, blending faith with reason, tradition with innovation. Between 1200 and 1450, Europe was still weaker and more fragmented than China or the Islamic world. Yet it was changing. Stronger monarchies, revived trade, and new intellectual currents were laying the groundwork for Europe's rise after 1450. For AP exam purposes, this unit is key for developments and processes, governance, cultural exchange, and social organization. Europe's feudal past and its Renaissance future make it a perfect case study in continuity and change. Europe in 1200 to 1450 was a region in transition, still provincial compared to Asia and the Middle East, but slowly positioning itself to become a major global player. In our next lecture, we'll tie everything together with comparisons across regions from 1200 to 1450, examining common patterns of state building, religion, trade, and social life. Until then, stay curious because history matters.